Now we're going to talk about circles. A circle with center HK and radius R has equation x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared, which is the center radius form of the equation of the circle. Now, if the center is the origin, in other words, 0, 0, then it makes sense that the formula for the circle would therefore be x squared plus y squared is equal to r squared, because h and k would both be 0. So looking at this first example, we're asked to find the center radius form of a circle with center 3, -7 and radius 5. So in other words, that 3 would be my h value and that -7 would be my k. And 5 would be my r. So I have x minus h, so x minus 3 squared plus y minus k, so if k is a -7 squared, that turns into plus a positive, is equal to 5 squared. Alright, so I can simplify this as x minus 3 squared plus y plus 7 squared is equal to 25. Now for the next example, you're told to find the center radius form of a circle with a center at 0, 0 and a radius of 3. So for that type of a problem, you simply are left with x squared plus y squared is equal to whatever your radius is squared. So your r is 3, so 3 squared gives me 9. Now putting together what we did last section where we learned the distance formula, we're going to work on this next problem. This next problem is asking us to find the equation for the circle with center at -3, 2, passing through to -4. Alright, so in other words, what it's saying is you've got a circle and you have the center right here at -3, 2. At -3, 2. And you've got some point that is on this circle, which is at 2, -4. So we'll just call it here. Alright, so that's the information you're given so far. Well, right away we know that h is therefore -3 and k would be 2. What we don't know is the radius. Keep in mind that the radius is the distance from the center to any point on the circle. So what we need to do is use the distance formula to find the distance between these two points. Alright, so recall the distance formula. I'm going to take r is equal to, and I've got 2 coordinate points. So r is going to be equal to the square root of x2, so that would be 2 minus x1, so 2 minus a -3 squared, so that turns into plus a positive, plus -4, so y2 minus y1, so -4 minus 2 squared. So that gives me the square root of 5 squared plus -4 minus 2 gives me -6 squared. So r is equal to the square root of 25 plus 36 So r is equal to the square root of 61. Now recall, for our equation of our circle, we have x minus h squared plus y minus k squared is equal to r squared. So we're not concerned about what r is, we want r squared. So if we know that r is the square root of 61, then by definition r squared would be 61, because I would square both sides. So at this point we have everything we need to find the equation of the circle. So we have x minus h, so x minus the negative 3 turns into a positive 3 squared, plus y minus k, so y minus 2 squared, is equal to r squared, which is 61. Alright, so now let's look at the next example. Now the next example is going to use what we learned in the previous section. So we're going to have to use our midpoint formula and our distance formula. Because for this one, we're asked to find the equation for the circle with a diameter whose endpoints are negative 3, negative 1, and 5, 5. So in other words, you've got a circle, and you've got 2 points along the diameter, so we'll call this my diameter right here. This point would be 5, 5. This other point would be negative 3, negative 1. Alright, so that's this point and this point. It's the diameter of circle. Pretend it's cut in half. Alright, so the first thing we need to do is we need to find the center. The way that we will do that is we will use the midpoint formula. Alright, so using the midpoint formula, we are going to take the x coordinates and add them together and divide by 2. So negative 3 plus 5 divided by 2. And the y coordinates and add them together and divide by 2. So negative 1 plus 5 divided by 2. Alright, so that gives me 2 over 2, comma 4 over 2, which simplifies to the coordinate 0.12. That is my center. Alright, so at this point, I know my center is coordinate 0.12, which means that h is equal to 1, k is equal to 2. But now I need to find my radius. So I need the distance between two of the points. For me personally, if possible, I will choose the one with the positive coordinate points because it just makes it less likely to make a mistake. So I'm going to find this distance right here, the distance from the coordinate 0.12, the center, to the coordinate 0.55. Now, you could find the distance between these 2 points, but then you're going to have to divide that by 2 to get the radius, and it ends up being a little bit more work. Alright, so now I'm going to use the distance formula to find my radius. So recall we just did that, so I'm taking the square root of x2 minus x1, so I've got 5 minus 1 squared plus y2 minus y1, minus y1, sorry, squared. So that means r is equal to the square root of 4 squared plus 3 squared, which means that r is equal to the square root of 16 plus 9, which gives me the square root of 25, which is 5. Alright, now keep in mind, we really are looking more for what r squared is. So if r is equal to 5, then r squared would be my 25. At this point, we can write the equation of my line. We've got x minus h, so x minus 1 squared plus y minus k, y minus 2 squared, is equal to r squared, which is the 25. All right, so now that we're comfortable finding the equations of circles, let's talk about graphing them. All right, so we're going to start off with a simple beginning. I call it a simple beginning because the center is the origin, the point 0, 0. So if you look, we've got x squared plus y squared is equal to r squared, which lets us know that the center is at the origin. Now, if r squared is equal to 9, then my radius I would find by taking the square root of both sides, which would be 3. Now recall that I'm just looking at the positive because I'm talking about radius, which is a measurement. So I'm going to use my center point and count 3 units to the right, 1, 2, 3. 3 units up, 3 units to the left, 3 units down. So I have 4 coordinate points plotted besides my center point. And now I'm just going to connect these with a smooth curve. Now, note that it asks for more than just graphing. It asks to state the x-intercepts and y-intercepts. So just a refresher, to find the x-intercepts, recall that you're going to let y equal 0. So in other words, I've got x squared plus 0 squared is equal to 9. In other words, x squared is equal to 9, so x is going to be equal to plus or minus 3. Alright, so that gives me 2 coordinate points, 3, 0, and negative 3, 0. Now, my math lab, for the purposes of this course, just asks for the plus or minus 3, or for positive 3 and a negative 3 separated by a comma. Now, to find the y-intercept, you're going to let x equal 0. So that means I've got 0 squared plus y squared equals 9. So y squared will equal 9. So y will equal plus or minus 3, which gives me the coordinate point 0, 3, and 0, negative 3. And you can see that all 4 of these points are plotted on my graph. Now it gets a little bit more difficult here. So where our center is not the origin. Now I just want to refresh everyone that the formula for the center radius form of a circle is you have x minus h squared plus y minus k squared is equal to r squared. So if you see that plus sign, what that means is that h is actually negative 3. And that k, if you look, is equal to 4. Now recall that r squared is equal to 36, which means that r is equal to 6. Keep in mind that r is a measure of distance, which is why we're looking at just the positive when we use our square root principle. Alright, so what that means is I'm going to plot my center point being negative 3, 4. So at negative 3, 4, I plot that point. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my radius of 6 to move 6 units to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 units up. 6 units to the left. And 6 units down. And then I'm going to connect all of these with a smooth curve. And that's obviously not a good smooth curve. Let's see if I can make it look a little bit better. Probably not. You get the idea though. Now we could make this a little bit better by first finding our x and y intercepts. So let me show you how we're going to do that. In order to find the y-intercept, just like before, we're going to let x equal 0. Alright, so what that means is I have 0 plus 3 in parentheses squared plus y minus 4 in parentheses squared is equal to 36. Alright, so that means I've got 9 plus y minus 4 squared is equal to 36. So I'm going to subtract 9 from both sides. And that's going to give me y minus 4 in parentheses squared is equal to 27. At this point, I'm going to use the square root principle to take the square root of both sides. That gives me y minus 4 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 27. Then I'm going to add 4 to both sides. That gives me y is equal to 4 plus or minus the square root of 27. Now, MyMathLab is going to ask for an approximate answer, which means you're going to plug that into your calculator to find your two solutions. Now, you could simplify the square root of 27. Keep in mind the square root of 27 is the same thing as the square root of 9 times the square root of 3. So I could rewrite that as 3 square root of 3. That would be fine. But for the purposes of this class and in MyMathLab, it's just going to ask you to find the rounded version. So that would be 9.196 and negative 1.196. That's a parenthesis. Alright, now to find my x-intercepts, I'm going to let y equal 0. So that means I've got x plus 3 in parentheses squared plus 0 minus 4 in parentheses squared equals 36. So I've got x plus 3 squared plus 16 equals 36. So I'm going to subtract 16 from both sides and get x plus 3 in parentheses squared is equal to 20. Then I'm going to use the square root principle to take the square root of both sides. That gives me x plus 3 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 20. And then lastly, I'll subtract 3 from both sides. And that gives me x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 20. Now, just like before, you could simplify the square root of 20. It is the same thing as saying the square root of 4 times the square root of 5. So you could write it as 2 square root of 5. But it's not necessary because what MyMathLab is asking for is an approximate solution, meaning enter this into your calculator and give me two different values. The two different values should be negative 7.47, 0, and 1.47.